Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. We're going to turn our attention to biodiversity, the measures that farmers are implementing to improve the quality of wildlife habitats and policy measures being developed. And today I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague, Dr. Catherine Keena, Countryside Management Specialist with Teagasc, who's going to talk to us today about the vital role hedgerows have to play in Ireland. Catherine, you're very welcome to our webinar today.
Thank you, Mark.
We're also joined by Pat Murphy, who's head of the Teagasc Knowledge Transfer Programme, Environment Knowledge Transfer Programme. Pat, good morning to you.
Good morning.
So, Catherine, you've been you've dedicated your career to date really on biodiversity and encouraging farmers to improve the measures that they take on their farms. And you've recently completed a study on biodiversity at farms. Can you tell us a little bit about that and the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, well, I suppose I've been involved in hedges or ditches, as many people refer to them, for 25 years now, since the beginning of REPS, since I returned from a stint in Wales as agricultural consultant. So sometimes I think I have said too much about them. So today I'm going to keep it very simple, because sometimes the simple facts get lost in the complexity of hedgerows and biodiversity. And you mentioned my own study, so I have a few findings that relate to hedgerows that I will speak about on that. It was more general biodiversity, all linear habitats.
Right. Brilliant. Okay. Well, look, we'll go straight into the presentation, I think, and if you could share your screen with us, and we'll encourage people to send us your questions throughout the presentation, and we'll try and get to as many of them as possible throughout the session. And so, Catherine, I'll hand over to you, and looking forward to the presentation.
Thank you, Mark. My title is The Nature of Irish Hedgerows, nature meaning nature and the nature of the beast in every way. I am going to deal with them under 4 headings: the value of hedgerows, quantity, quality, and management. The value, there are many values in hedgerows, and the first one I'm speaking about is the biodiversity. And my graphic there comes from an article in this month's Today's Farm, the Teagasc magazine, and the link is there for people if they want to look at it afterwards. I titled it The Secret Life of Irish Hedges, because it is amazing to know all the different flora and fauna that are involved in hedges. For example, of 110 birds that are regularly recorded in the Countryside Management Countryside Bird Survey, 55 use hedges, 35 of them to nest, and others for other shelter, other purposes, feed, etc. Our small mammals, all our mammals would use hedgerows, such as the hedgerow, the shrew, the pine marten, but deer, everything travels along hedgerows, uses them for shelter, food. They're important there. We have 9 species of bats. A lot of them live in hedgerows, nest in trees. Not all, some of them use houses, but all of them will use hedgerows for traveling and for feeding on. They do not cross a wide field. They will follow along linear habitats such as hedges. Similarly for bees, we have 77 solitary bees in Ireland, 21 bumblebees and 1 honeybee. We've got a lot of attention for our bees through the pollinator plan, and they are provided there's flowers in hedgerows. Hedgerows are an incredibly important source of pollen and nectar for the bees. Moths, which are out at night time, generally we have over 1,400 species of moths, and again they would be linked to hedges. Similarly for the butterflies, 35 species of butterflies. So it's amazing all the flora and fauna that are associated with hedgerows. There is an interest at the present in foraging for food, and there are species that people are still using for food from hedgerows. And I have examples there: the elderflower, elderberry for the wine and the syrups, the hazelnut, the crabapple, the bramble. The rosehip, one interesting story that when I thought I was the only one when I was in national school that was sent out with a bag, all our school, to collect rosehips, which were, I presume they were made into vitamin C to send to Africa at the time. And I mentioned that at a few farmer meetings throughout the country, and a certain generation of farmers, I was amazed, actually had a strong, vivid memory of that. So it obviously happened throughout the country. So rosehips are a very good source of vitamin C. One interesting point there is the 119 native Irish flora have historically been used for food in Ireland. That's all flora. And there's a very interesting book that just published last year, The Wild Food Plants of Ireland, by Tom Curtis and Paul Whelan, and it's fascinating for anyone that has an interest in that. And it's all about the Irish plants. Hedges are a store of carbon. Hedges potentially sequester 0.5 to 2.7 tons of carbon dioxide per year. There is a lot we don't know, and the current Farm Carbon project, I'm working with Lillian O'Sullivan in the Teagasc Environmental Soils and Land Use Department in Johnstown Castle, and that project is aiming to develop a growth model taking direct measurements of hedge biomass, along with assessing the impact of management on hedgerow biomass accumulation. So while we don't know, it's very obvious to that the two pictures below, the heavily managed one and the unmanaged hedgerow, it's quite likely that they will have different accumulations of carbon. So that study is underway, and we'll be very eagerly waiting the results of that in time. Hedges protect watercourses. Again, Ian Thomas, during the agricultural catchments, had a few papers and was found that hedgerows are microtopographic features that block runoff and train dissolved pollutants from reaching the water body. It's probably obvious. It makes sense. It's obvious. So it's a very important function of hedgerows. Shelter, farmers like this one, a number of farmers who have planted hedgerows in recent years have aimed them at the calves and the different places, but it is good for animal welfare. It is nice to see on any farm, but even in a dairy paddock, that they would at least have one hedge during every grazing. Good for animal welfare. Hedges are part of the are an integral part of the Irish landscape. Hedges and fields are complementary. One defines the other. They give character to a landscape. You can picture your own county, your own locality, your own townland, and it does define the landscape. Part of our cultural heritage leading on from that, they're part of ancient history. Our townland boundaries, the older hedgerows have been here for thousands of years, and some of them are townland boundaries. The newer ones, most of our hedgerows were planted only 200 years ago, but even when it comes to archaeological features, I think 200 years is kind of a figure that we consider things to be archaeological as opposed to historical, and even more important. Local heritage, I think, is a point that again connects certain people. It gives identity to townlands and farms, the sense of place. One example of this is in Tipperary, the Kickham Tree Project. I was delighted to be associated with my colleague Michael Summers there during this year's Heritage Week, just the day before the lockdown, the latest restriction. And we, the Charles Kickham, who wrote the song Valley Slieve Naman and Knock na Gro, walked out from Mullinahone along a hedgerow, and there was a particular tree in that hedgerow, an ash tree, that he sat and did his writing. So the local people there, the local farmers in that picture, are very conscious of that, and they're talking about that. So that's a very, very important person, obviously, to have a connection to a hedgerow. But I do think that everybody listening here can probably think of hedges, and possibly some that are now gone. I think of my own journey to school and the hedges that were there, and you know, you would be very familiar with what's in them because you're passing them every day. Apart from farmers, a lot of hedgerows in that category where people are familiar with them disappear because of linear development of housing and replaced by, you know, non-native species. So I think there's messages there for everybody. But we often don't value the common habitats such as the hedges. If we were beside, you know, perhaps a bog or the burn, we would say that's really special. The hedgerow next to us is also important. And as I say, it's sometimes it's that heritage aspect which draws in people there. On Rud is Anaf is Intach. What is rare is wonderful, but let's not forget the common thing outside our own gate. Right, moving on to quantity. A very interesting study has been, sorry, that should be 2019. Last year, our Stuart Green, again, our colleague working through the EPA research, has come up with the figure of 689,000 kilometres of non-dry stone wall boundaries. So he could identify the stone wall ones. So we're talking largely hedgerows, also banks, but banks are also extremely important for biodiversity. We assume carbon as well with their own flora. So it's a very interesting, and there's a study there without looking at the figures. It's just, I have you can look up the booklet yourself. It's a very interesting one, and it's on a county basis. And what it also gives us is the unshared and the shared and the internal hedgerows, which are very, very significant differences when it comes to management. I think we always need to acknowledge there's three types of hedgerows on a farm when it comes to management. We'll come to that later. The occurrence of the boundaries, again, from this study in the Lucas data set, it shows generally what we probably know, but definitely what we know with where the dry stone walls are in the west. But interesting there, the unmanaged and the managed hedgerows, what it was picking up. So again, has implications for management at a national scale. With regard to quantity, quantity is obviously depends on new ones being added, but also ones being taken away. Under the EIA Agriculture Regulations 2011, if a farmer is removing more than 500 metres, or which is more likely to happen first, create a new field that is more than 5 hectares, they must look for permission from the Department of Agriculture. And about 80-90 per year there that's not the figure, but it is actually a similar number, because most of them in general are approved, some are not approved. So they can be removed if they get permission. However, a second one, which is a separate, comes under a separate heading because it's not a law, it's not a regulation, it comes under cross compliance, is our landscape features. So where a farmer removes hedges and drains, or drains, a replacement hedge or drain of similar length must be planted at a suitable location on the holding in advance of the removal of the existing hedgerow or drain. To me, that came in since in 2009, and I've found that to be extremely useful, because it makes people think twice before they consider removing hedges. Do I really want to remove it? And if I do, I must plant the same length again. Obviously, the new hedge, as I alluded to earlier, is not as valuable as the older hedge, but there's a place for everything on the farm. And so that's the cross-compliance regulation. The quantity, again, we can measure from studies like that. We can go from the maps, etc. Just in my study, I came up with a very simple way of kind of evaluating. If I was talking to an advisor or a farmer, am I looking at a farm that looks like the picture on the right or on the left? So my study was on 149 dairy farms in County Waterford, and the average field size was just over 5 hectares, but the range was tremendous, and they weren't outliers. It was a fairly the normal curve of the smallest average field size per farm being 1.17 hectares and the largest being 37 hectares. So you're talking about 100-acre fields, which are not uncommon. I mean, they are there. We've all seen them. What was interesting about this, and it has been used in one of the IP projects, is to get a very quick snapshot of which farm you're talking about, to get that average field size, rather than going to a map, which is a perfectly accurate way of doing it, by asking the farmer 2 questions. I'm very confident that I get the right answer. So if every farmer knows how many acres they own, or hectares, so 100 acres, given a minute or 2, every farmer will come up with how many fields they have. You can see them going through it in their head, in their picture in the fields. So if they have 10 fields, it's a very simple calculation. It's obviously including all boundaries, so it may not all permanent boundaries. Now we're not talking temporary electric fences. So it's just a very quick snapshot, as I said, of coming up with a figure there. That to me is extremely important, and it can be the elephant in the room when we're talking about hedgerow management. There's not much point in talking about hedgerow management with the farm on the right hand side there, because there are no hedgerows. Another thing I asked the farmers was, by showing them these 4 pictures, I got their preference for the farming platform structure. Now, this is not talking about quality of land or anything like that, but again, interestingly enough, the first one was the kind of the landscape C there, which had some trees and hedges, very narrowly followed behind by the number 2, which was the very neat, low, short back and sides, no trees. And then the dairy prairie, number 3, and then number 4, the very traditional landscape. That was their preference. So that bodes kind of good, because you know, people are happy. I think if the structure was right, I think dairy farmers will live with more hedgerows, if we can encourage them that way. And because what they prefer, it doesn't always show what's on the ground, because they can inherit things can happen for other reasons, but it is an indicator of where the landscape will go to, if you know, all other things being equal, if they have the money to either plant or take out hedgerows. Another finding was the critical role of contractors. 85% of farmers used contractors for hedge cutting, and of whom 49% left the decision to the contractor on how to cut. So the farmers in general think the contractors know best. The contractors are doing what they think the farmer wants. It's not always a very enlightened discussion. Francis Quigley, that's his one message to everybody, is to talk and find out what you want when you're talking to contractors, for the contractor to ask the farmer what they want. And so I think the farmer is doing the contractor is doing what he thinks the farmer wants. The farmer is doing they're both actually doing what they think the neighbours and the broader society want. So I think it's very important, which is why we try to move outside the farming community with our hedgerow messages, because, you know, I can think back to a generation close to myself, close to my own family, of elderly people who, when they see anything other than a low, neat hedgerow, it's a sign of a bad farmer. and the low, neat, tidy hedgerows is definitely a good farmer. So we have to educate that low, neat and tidy is not good for biodiversity. And coming on to that, the tidiness, my point I keep trying to stress is the quest for neatness should not override ecological considerations. That's so important. I gave it a slide to itself. And finally, on the study was the role of knowledge exchange. The farmers sourced their environmental information from their traditional sources of agricultural information. So I think it's highlighted for me that the network of agricultural advisors are key to improve hedgerow management. The farmer is more likely to listen to the advisor than listen to an article that I write or that somebody who's promoting hedgerows is saying what to do. So there's a key, the contractors and the advisors are key to, we need to engage them to understand what to do. Quality, the age of the hedge, obviously more species. You can see the fungi there. The variety of species, we have about only about 20 native shrubby tree species, but obviously they're not all in hedgerows, and whatever we have, we have, but when it's coming to new ones, we can talk about it. And native species, really important. The work has always been there that the willows, the oaks, the native species have much more associated biodiversity and are in tune with them once they're the native, and the native provenance species that have been here for 10,000 years are in tune with the associated biodiversities. The buds open just as the moths and the insects are coming to get the food. The native hedge species, the thorn species, you can't go wrong with them for stock proofness plus everything else. They do everything. The white thorn, the black thorn, the holly, the white thorn also, some people call it hawthorn, but a survey we did a number of years ago at the ploughing with a large number of farmers, 75% of farmers call it white thorn. So, you know, sometimes in books it's called hawthorn, but I particularly like to use the local lingo for all of these. Now we can go to the shuck, the skeoch, but skeoch is thorn, so it covers both black thorn and white thorn, so it's not maybe as useful. Other native hedging species, Gelder rose spindle, the native privet now, providing it's not the one, the garden privet, and the hazel, they are good in a hedgerow. They tolerate trimming. And then we have the climbers, the blackberry, the woodbine or honeysuckle, dog rose. I suppose what's not there then is the smooth stem species, like the ash, the oak, the birch. They're, if they can belong in a hedge, but what happens sometimes, people think only of those as trees and they leave out the flowering ones. And also if it's a smooth stem species like those, they need to be left grow as a tree rather than cut as a hedgerow, where the species I'm showing there tolerate both. The farming platform structure, the linear habitats, there's so much evidence that how important, much more important they are than area-based habitats, because they have a greater edge to area ratio. However, a linear habitat with individual dead ends, an individual length of hedge with dead ends, is so good, far more better if there's a corridor network. With, you know, networks for nature and corridors of movement for the birds, the bats and everything I talked about. But even more important then is if we have a mosaic of hedgerows linking habitats, T-junctions, intersections, and linking in with other habitats. That's a high quality farming platform structure. Hedge height. Birds will not nest in a hedgerow unless it's over 1.5 meters high. They know that the magpies or the birds of prey will get them if they're up near the top. The fox will get them if they're near the bottom. They need to be buried in a hedgerow. So everybody, if you walk along, you won't find nests in the winter when you can see these things at ground level. So we need the hedges to be, otherwise they are not fit for birds. Similarly for the bees need flowers. If we have hedgerows without flowers, they are no good for bees. And similarly, the flowers then lead on to the fruit for the birds and the small animals. So for a hedgerow fit for birds and bees, we need the height and the flowers. Hedge management, moving on to that, depends on hedge type. These two hedgerows were planted way back, but in the same era, the same time, same type of hedge, white thorn hedge, managed totally different and have ended up with a totally different structure. Both have advantages and disadvantages there. So this is where we really need to understand how hedgerows grow. Hedges are man-made, so it's not like a bog, it's not like a species-rich grassland that has kind of evolved semi-naturally. Hedges are man-made, and they need management if we want to keep them as a hedge. And we must all understand the apical dominance, so that when the little white thorn shrub is planted there, if the top is left grow, unmanaged, it wants to turn into an individual white thorn tree with a single bole and a canopy, a top heavy canopy. So that's what we're working with or against, depending on what we want. And there's no right or wrong here, but it is very important to understand what do we want when we talk about. There is not a one-size-fits-all for managing hedgerows. But this is where it gets complex. So in an effort to make it simple and to have rules that work, that are not, will never leave you wrong, we've divided hedgerows into 3 categories: those with a dense base, relict, and escaped. So the dense base hedgerow, it says what it is, what it says. A big thick growth at the base, very good for nesting birds. Side trim to a triangular profile from a wide base, leaving the peak as high as possible with occasional trees, including thorns, at irregular intervals. The peak, again, a variety is the spice of life with everything, with biodiversity. So the height, if we want to stop it turning into the line of trees, the apical dominance must be kept. It must be nipped at the top, and the highest then is whatever the hedge, the arm of the flail can reach, so probably 15 feet or so. Again, if there's some lower on the farm, that's fine, but the higher, the bulkier, the better from a biodiversity point of view, and possibly from a carbon. The relict hedge is this beautiful hedge. It's the one on the picture postcards of Ireland. It's full of fruit and berries there. The temptation is to say it's no good. We've got to say that's absolutely incredible landscape feature, beautiful. Leave it alone, fence it off, but do not interfere with the hedge. It will possibly die. The escaped hedge is at a different stage. It could be rejuvenated, or it can be left grow on to being the line of trees, or whatever. Okay. What we don't want is inappropriate management. So again, to understand the way the white thorn or any of the trees grow, wherever you cut the thorn, it will sprout. So if it's cut at that level there, we'll end up with neither a tree nor a hedge, toilet brush hedges. It pulls all the growth up to where you cut it. And then, the management, so what we recommend is a variety of different hedgerows on the farm, and there my little picture is meant to show. Ideally, they would have some relic hedgerows, some new hedgerows, thorn trees retained, tall triangular profile hedges with a dense base, escaped hedgerows, but nothing been done wrong there. At least everything has been managed for what it can get out of it. Garamahagi.
Great, Catherine. Thank you so much for that. Excellent presentation. We are getting lots of interesting questions coming through here. Just looking at your interesting description there of the
Yeah, the toilet brush hedge. I've heard you refer that to that many occasions. I think it's a great description of it. How are we doing? You know, hedgerows, obviously they're a habitat for many bird species in Ireland. How are we doing in terms of farmland bird populations in the country, and you know, our efforts to provide habitat for it? Because ultimately that's what I suppose a lot of the biodiversity work is about, isn't it? It's about providing habitat for mammals and bird species.
Yeah, I suppose the hedgerow birds tend not to be the ones on the red list. There are other categories more critical, but I suppose to me, biodiversity, every townland, every location deserves to have its own biodiversity. So you know, we need them all. And now that's not to say that some of them, the yellowhammer is not doing as well as it has, but you know, in general, it's not. This is why they're not designated, Mark. If it was a hen harrier or a curlew or whatever, there would be major programs.
Mm-hmm.
So the hedgerows are the common habitat. That's you know, and we don't want them to be designated, but we want them to be appreciated.
Sure. And in terms of the work that Teagasc is doing, you showed a picture of the course that we did with contractors last year. What other sort of actions are happening with farmers? And indeed, I know there's work going on in the colleges as well around the importance of hedgerows. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, last year we had our first hedgerow week, and we focused on the management of existing hedgerows. This year, our hedgerow week is the 7th to the 11th of December, and we are going to focus on planting hedgerows, and we're going to involve experts from all the different, my talk there, all the different values, who can give us the experts on each of those topics, the birds, the bees, the carbon, all that side of it. So that's one major one for this audience we'll be very interested in. On the ground with advisors, the discussion group to me is the key, and my study developed this biodiversity management practice index, of which hedgerows is one feature, the others being watercourses and field margins. And it's a tool that an agricultural advisor can pick up, ask 8 questions back of the envelope in a discussion group, and if you score 1 and I score 8, or the other farmer scores 8, it opens the topic for discussion. So hedgerows is one part of that, watercourses, and it's the common linear habitats on intensive farmland. So it will work very well in our discussion group. So we're rolling that out, Mark. So that will hopefully have a huge benefit in that the right person is telling the farmer the right thing.
Very good. And hedgerows, I mean, we talk about it a lot in the context of biodiversity, but I mean, they're also an important feature in the landscape for, you know, slowing down water, erosion, sediment loss as well. I see that is a prescription in many agri-environmental schemes in the UK, for example, where they do have a serious issue with erosion.
As I mentioned, the agricultural catchments showed the importance of a catchment, a hedged catchment, being very important for water quality. And our ASSAB colleagues are very conscious of hedgerows for both the biodiversity and protecting the watercourse. Yeah.
So I take it that they will still form an integral part of any future agri-environmental schemes. Reps, there was a huge amount of planting done during that scheme, and
I would hope so. But I think, again, before we create any habitat, we need to ensure that we're managing the existing ones correctly. So that would be a key message, I think, to manage existing ones, and again focus on maybe where we need to plant them. You mentioned the hedgerows. I've also mentioned the average field size. Because we had criticism in the past with a farm who was full of hedgerows way back, it was suggested to plant hedgerows, didn't make sense. Other farms, it makes huge sense. So I think we need to understand a little bit more about why we're planting them and for what purpose then when it comes to picking the species and the management afterwards. There's not one size fits all, but it's as it's not just a case of the same management suits all either.
I see a few comments coming in around the rose hips. People have family relations who sent rose hips off to Africa, so certainly
that's aging them, like me.
Had some interesting questions coming through there in relation to hedgerows.
Yeah, I think I suppose possibly a few of the questions pointing to issues coming up in future policy that obviously we're not going to be able to say what's going to happen, but we might give hints of direction. Will hedgerows be part of proposed biodiversity audits? What other habitats might be included? And will there be a focus on quality as opposed to just quantity in terms of management?
I suppose all I can say, I would hope so to all of those, Pat. Yeah, I would hope so. All in the right place, in the right way, yeah. And with the right education, Pat. As I said, I've been speaking for 25 years about hedges, and I don't think I've always got my message across.
Very good. Just another one on the specific do's and don'ts in relation to hedgerows, specifically for pollinators. What can we do, and are there things that maybe farmers are doing in terms of management of their hedgerows that would be specifically frowned upon if you want if you're a pollinator?
Well, it's so easy. Bees need flowers. If there's no flowers, there's no bees. So however you get them, there are different ways. I think this is where it's down to the farmer, whether they go for the approach of leaving them unmanaged fully, turning into relic hedgerows or a linear woodland. That will suit some. It should suit, hopefully it would suit some hedgerows on every farm. And for the hedgerows that farmers want to maintain, provided they leave occasional flowering trees in the hedgerow. The ash has always been the favourite. Rex did great work in getting farmers to leave, encouraging farmers to leave trees in hedgerows, and the most popular by far was the ash, with good reason, the Hurleys and the firewood. And what we missed up to lately was to keep talking about the thorn tree. Causes no problem for the hedge. And it's there. We should not be planting trees in hedgerows. We should allow the white thorn in the hedge, white thorn, blackthorn, holly, to grow up, and then farmers say it'll be crooked. So what, the birds and bees don't mind. We're not talking about growing a specimen tree. So there's some very simple things there. So, but however you get to it, and then of course we're into the margins, which we won't touch on too much today. We'll be talking about them more next week. But there can be flowers at the base of the hedgerow, so I'm leaving the right margin there as well.
There is legislation protecting hedgerows, Catherine, isn't there?
There's a sorry.
Well, the EIA, I suppose, Mark.
But in terms of hedgerow cutting season and so forth.
Oh, I beg your pardon, and that's a good point, Mark, because that's why we're here today, and I forgot to mention it. The September, 6 months on, 6 months off. So from September, which is why we big focus on hedges this week. So thanks for reminding me. There's been no change. There was a bit of confusion. There was talks about extending it, but it hasn't been. So we're 1st of September on. Again, a big discussion about should you leave them until spring, if it's in your control and if it suits, if you are going to be cutting berries. But I suppose the hedges that I'm talking about, that I see being cut in the right way, they don't have much fruit on them because you're cutting more frequently. You will only get the fruit and flowers in a mature specimen tree. So side trimming the base is not a problem, and providing you leave the occasional trees full of fruit and flowers. But if you can leave the cutting until February, until the last moment, but that is not practical for all contractors, and it's not as critical. The timing, the method is far more important as to how it's done from now until the end of February.
Because I know there is a view there that some people would say, well, let's have a bushy a hedgerow and allow those fruit to grow and to allow some encroachment into the field.
If that's fine, that's one way of doing it. What I worry about is where a hedgerow is not cut for a few years and then the flail cannot cut it. And the circular saw is not a common, it's for reshaping, it's not common out there, it's not as common, it's not, so it's, to me, a little and often at the base of the hedgerow. I've seen hedgerows where the wire has been taken down, a hedgerow that we featured before, and when the wire was taken down, I was so delighted that the farm never put it back up again. But he does cut the base, the side. Now it's 15, 16 foot high, so plenty of stuff in it. But keeping the base dense is very important if we're trying to avoid for stop proofness for the wire. So it's really, you really need to think what, if you're happy to fence it off and leave it grow wild, that's perfectly fine, Mark. So it's not the same for every hedge. It's whatever you want.
Okay. Pat, some more questions coming through there.
Yeah, there's I suppose, can you hear me?
Yes, we
can.
Okay, sorry, I think my connection is not great today. There's a question there in relation to how do we measure our biodiversity and what level of measurement is going on a progressive basis. And I suppose we have the Biodiversity Data Centre, which is our primary measuring, but just to make people aware, I think, of what measurement is going on and maybe some of the key directions that that we're seeing with our biodiversity.
Yeah, well, I suppose just on the hedgerow one, the work that the Stuart Green, that mapping is incredibly important, a useful tool for calculating where we're at and changes at a national level.
That's using satellite imagery, is that right, Catherine?
Yes, Mark. Yeah, yes. Then
but,
we have.
But I think, I suppose, what the question was getting at is the actual is the outcome of it, the biodiversity of species, the measurement of those, not just of the habitats.
Yeah, well, the Countryside Bird Survey is one that's widely acknowledged as tracking the birds and the different categories. So that's, and there are lots of individual species being tracked. There's fantastic work, we'd say, with the scientific recording of the hen harrier, now linked to the hen harrier EIP. So it's similar. So individual species then would be recorded, and of course all the designated habitats are recorded regularly. So the designated habitats would be looked after, an individual, especially species on the annex species that are under threat. So maybe some of the more common ones, then it can fall to surveys or different, but there's an awful lot of work going on, even through the EIPs and the universities, individually maybe more so.
Catherine, there's also, isn't the Teagasc National Farm Survey now including biodiversity indicators in its the survey that it does, the sustainability assessment? I believe there's they're trying to develop indicators there to improve to monitor the trends in farm biodiversity. I know it's at an early stage, but this is something that's hopefully going to be referenced across Europe as well.
Yeah, well, the 8 questions in my Biodiversity Management Practice Index were asked in the National Farm Survey for the whole country. And myself and Anne Markey from UCD and Jim Kinsella and the people in Athenry, we're going to National Farm Survey. People were going to write up that soon. So that will be a national level of where I did mine. But then that could be asked again in a few years' time if we found, that would be one measure of biodiversity management practice. So that would again get to the average farm size. So it's an indirect measure of hedgerow length.
Very
good. There's a lot of questions around the general area of the regulatory issues around removal and replacement of hedgerows. Are there sanctions for farmers? I think we rightly see in media a lot of attention where there are cases of hedgerows being removed, but there's, I suppose, sometimes a media which says that there's whole-scale removal of hedgerows. You might get you to comment on what you're feeling in relation to those issues are.
Yeah, well, I mentioned, I mean, I've been working on hedgerows a long time, and until there was always the law is one thing, but it's unlikely people are going to be brought to court for, I remember reading back in the early 2000s, about a judge, even not taking it seriously. So it is very difficult, but what is powerful is the cross compliance. Every farm, is 5% farms get inspected. They're likely to get inspected. So for both the removal of hedgerows and also now for the cutting. So rather than the farmer going to prison, there's a financial penalty, and it's small and it gets bigger as it goes. So nobody ignores the cross compliance. So I think it's very good at the moment. It has taken a while perhaps for everybody to become aware of it, but advisors are very aware of advising farmers not to do anything with hedgerows now without, checking. So I think there's great protection there now, Pat. There's it's not you can't remove everything, which is possibly a good way, because if it's very black and white that nothing can ever move again, maybe that's not what we want. So you have to plant again. It's great to have new hedgerows coming on if you do remove them. So I think it's at quite a good stage of the removal side. The management is the side I would like to focus more on.
Specific question
in
relation to the types of species that you'd recommend in a hedgerow. Question here: would you encourage farmers to plant rowan, wild cherry, holly, whitebeam, elder, alder, and spindle into existing and new hedgerows?
Existing hedgerows, I've found very little success over the years. They're dry, they're inhospitable. It can be done. I would far prefer to plant, a corner of trees it's easier and they'll be more effective. And we can leave existing shrubs grow up within the hedge. So I'm not a big fan of planting within the hedgerow. Your question was if you were planting a new hedgerow. I would be sticking to the basics for it. Again, it's what do you want? A simple whitethorn hedge with a dense base and allowing the flowers in it is valuable. You can add to that by putting some of the species. Now, I wouldn't. The ones you mentioned there again are only suitable if they're left as trees. Our old hedgerows throughout the country the structure has been destroyed where we'll say ash trees have been cut at the 3 foot high. And then they're spread out. They're neither a hedge nor a tree. So only plant those species, the rowan, the birch, some of the other ones you mentioned. So other than I only plant those if you're going to leave them as an individual tree.
You mentioned ash there, Catherine. I mean, ash dieback is having a major impact on plantations and hedgerows. I mean, what do you see the future there? Are there going to be, I know there's some work going on in Teagasc in Ashtown there to look at new resistant species. But aside from that, I mean, is that going to have a major impact on hedgerows across Ireland?
I suppose we don't know, and I certainly don't know, Mark. We hope for the best, hope that there's resistance. And that Kick'em Tree project that I mentioned from the heritage point of view, Michael Summers has also found ash trees, very, very old ash trees there that have not succumbed, and they're taking grafts and breeding from them. So look, it's another whole world. I don't know. We hope, but at the moment we're not planting ash trees.
Okay, just a question, and you mentioned food source earlier, but and a question I suppose is cutting of hedges early in the autumn damaging to food sources? And I suppose allied to that is what's the normal timing that farmers actually do go out, while they're allowed to go out for September? What is the normal timing that hedges are actually cut?
It's very much from September. Contractors are ready eager, and obviously it's their business and their time frame, window, weather, etc. So, and you can see from my figures there the large amount of farmers who use contractors. So it is very much, I would say, it's spread through, and it's really weather dependent, Pat. So September would be a very popular month for going. Again, look at what you're cutting. If you're only cutting the hedgerows that are routinely cut, giving them a light cut every year and still maintaining your fruiting species, you know, occasional ones. So not all hedge cutting removes species, it removes fruit, and equally then the ones, if you leave, you know, the very short back and sides that we've seen, if they were left grow, there would still be no fruit in them for years. So we need to be really think about the hedge before we cut it. What are we cutting? Because there's two totally different answers there. As I said, leaving one hedge will give us nothing, and leaving a tree in another hedge will give us a huge amount.
And a related question, just asking, are there programs with contractors to improve their understanding of the value of hedgerows?
Yeah, well, myself and Francis Quigley work closely. He's the Teagasc machinery specialist, and they were extremely involved in Hedgerow Week last year, and will be again this year. So, and to be, I mean, I've worked with contractors for years. We started way back in the thousands with Tom Ryan, and contractors will do whatever they're paid to do. So I have never have a problem, provided if the farmer wants to do it. It's a lack of communication, lack of, you know, if they're being paid and they're asked to do anything, they will do it. But they take such a pride in their work, and up to now it has been, how level can you put a level on top of the hedge? That's the judge of a good, you know, a skilled man that's doing it. So yeah, we're really important. Tidy towns, everybody involved in hedgerows, because hedgerows are one that bridge the farming and the you know, well, certainly the towns, communities. So it's, and I know there's a lot of interest here from the county councils and the heritage officers, you know, are on this, and you know, we're working with them, and I think we'll work more with them at county level. Maybe when we're having an event, we need to be getting the same message to the farmer and the non-farmer in the locality.
Catherine, we spent a lot of our earlier webinars looking at the whole climate side of agriculture, climate change impacts and so forth. You mentioned the project that's you're working with Johnson Castle on. Are there any, do we have any indications of the potential of hedgerows in terms of carbon sequestration? I know you showed some figures there. I mean, is that something that can be included in the inventory for Ireland to show as an offset?
It's not at the moment, but, and again, I hope it would, Mark. Yeah, and we need the facts and figures. And you see, hedgerows, I suppose, in Europe aren't a major habitat, a major structure here in the UK, but hedgerows are not everywhere. So we need to be leading the way on that topic.
Okay, and how long is that project set to last for, Catherine?
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, very good. Okay, we're coming close to the end of the webinar now. Pat, have we any last few questions there?
Yeah, there's a few questions on topics that were dealt with a little bit. And one is there any recommendation for planting species to help prevent?
Okay, we're losing you, Pat.
And flooding and water runoff. And is there, I suppose, any particular? You're losing me. Just in relation to preventing flooding and preventing losses to water.
Okay, well, if we're talking flooding, we're talking wet areas, so willow and alder, really good, and again, you know, yeah. So it's soil type, and again, the simple message for without being an expert is look around your locality, look around the field, what is growing well. That's what we recommend to plant.
Okay, Pat, we may not tempt fate any further with your line there. I think it has gotten us through the the important parts. So, Catherine, I thank you for your excellent presentation, and you have been coordinating this month of the biodiversity months that we're having on the webinar series. Do you want to tell us about some of the speakers that we have coming over the next number of weeks?
Can you put it up on screen there, Mark? Or
I can,
I know
yes.
next week, Lorna Cole from Shook in Scotland is talking about field margins. I heard her speaking on an international pollinator conference, and it was just fascinating and so practical. Some fascinating facts coming, what she has. So very much following on from mine is kind of the linear side of it. John and Dara are on, John Finn and Dara Hulacan from Johnstown Castle are the following week. What's our title there, Mark? Can you see it?
It's Biodiversity on Farmland, Current Status, Policy Impacts, and Farm Scale Responses.
Excellent. So I know they talk from the beginning of policy right down to the practical side. So, and there's so much changes there with the Farm to Fork and the EU biodiversity strategy that are directing all of our work. So that will be extremely important. And I think the one that then we've Jane Stout talking about NACR from Trinity College Dublin, talking about natural capital and how we value biodiversity at a national level and all levels. And then we have a very interesting one from Maria Long from National Parks and Wildlife Service on semi-natural grassland the first week of October. It's not showing up in our September series, but it will finish off our biodiversity ones nicely. Super.
Yeah, no, looks like a really interesting lineup. Okay, I think we'll wrap things up at this point. Catherine, thanks so much for your excellent presentation. Pat, thanks for helping out. I just want to...
Apologies about the line.
No, it was fine. It was fine. And I want to say a special thank you to our production team, the people who you don't see behind the scenes. They include Andy Boland, Yvonne Maher, and Noel Meehan has also been involved in our series. So we do hope to see you next week. For our next week, we'll be talking to Lorna Cole from SRUC in Scotland, as Catherine pointed out earlier on there. We do encourage you, if you get a chance, to fill out our short survey at the end of the webinar. And we thank you again for your continued viewing, and we will talk to you again next week. So with that, thanks again. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.